Morning, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 126, and for this episode, as the title suggests, I'm going to be concentrating and focusing on a prolific minimal and tech house label that is known as Perlon. Now, Perlon is based out of Germany. And one of the things that I've noticed over, a couple decades of going out and following electronic music is for the most part, a lot of these Perlon releases that people overseas seem to be super familiar with just never really made it over here to the States. I know that there are a lot of US buyers and a lot of US collectors that own Perlon records, but I cannot think of a single instance of a time where I was out at a party and somebody played a Perlon track, or I went to get an ID for a Perlon record, or for a track that the DJ played, and I found out that it turned out to be a Perlon release. So I do think that there's sort of a regionalness to Perlon. I think it's definitely concentrated in Europe, and like I said, for whatever reason, these tracks just didn't get a lot of play over here in the States. So when I started listening to electronic music and collecting records in 2004, a lot of the music that I was listening to was coming from American labels, and while Perlon was kind of running in the background, I just didn't get a lot of exposure to it. A lot of the records that I picked up out of the catalog, I ended up actually discovering probably from the period of 2008 until now, and a lot of that just had to do with the genres that I was listening to. When I was concentrating on minimal and tech house in probably 2007, 2006, maybe up to 2008, I think labels like Minus and Richie Houghton and all of his proteges kind of stole the show, and I sort of missed the boat on Perlon. I will say, when I go back and listen through the early Perlon catalog, especially if I go on Discogs and I listen through the ones, like if I just target the records that have reviews, I think a lot of those records haven't really held up that well. And I think even if you went back to the reviewers and said, hey, this '05 crazy wacky minimal record, do you still like this? Do you still think this sounds good? I think a lot of those reviewers might even like kind of backtrack and be like, that hasn't aged well. So there is a pretty decent portion of the Perlon catalog that was like kind of trend setting, but because it was trend setting, it also kind of like died by the same trend that it created. There are some picks out of the early Perlon catalog that have aged well, and I'm going to cover a couple of those. But for me, I think the most elegant part of the catalog is probably from 2008 to present. And there's another segment of the catalog, the label started in 1997. So I would say 1997 to '05, you're really rolling the dice, because there's, I think, just a lot of music in there that, like I said, was like sort of fatty, a little bit trendy, and it's not the type of record that I would like to have in my collection at this point. So I have 5 Perlon singles for you today. This episode is just going to concentrate on the singles. I know that there's a lot of dope albums on Perlon, and I'm going to cover those probably in a different episode, because I wanted to just segregate out the singles. And I might also come back, I like to do part 2 on some of these episodes sometimes, because with Perlon having just such a massive catalog, probably 200 records if I had to guess. There's a lot of really good singles in there, and I just grabbed 5 that I thought would be the easiest to talk about today, because I like them. It's always easier to talk about the ones that you like the most. So I'll go in chronological order, and going back to actually, you know what? Let me first give credit to the people that founded Perlon. So there's Marcus Nicolai, there's Thomas Franzman, who is known as Zip, and there's Chris Rehberger. And I think Marcus Nicolai is the main. I think he's the primary. That's what I gathered from my initial recon. And I also think that because if you look at Perlon '01, the very first record that came out on the label, that's done by Marcus. So that's my theory there. I do think he's the primary leader of the Perlon gang, I guess, if you want to call them that. So I have 5 singles for you today, and my first pick for you is one that came out in 1999, and it just repressed recently. I just recently picked this up about 2 weeks ago. This is Perlon number 13, and this is by a artist that I absolutely love, and I don't think I've reviewed a single record from this guy on my channel yet. This is STL's Portside Waves. STL is Stefan Laubner, and he has a very distinct, heavy, thick, chunky, like thunky, a thunky, very heavy, minimal sound, and a very odd vibe about him. I think most people would agree that when you listen to your typical STL record, you could, even if you didn't know it was an STL record, you could spot it probably in the first 15 or 20 seconds just by the signature kick that he uses. He's known for using a lot of very odd and quirky synths and laying them over top of those tracks, and he has a very thematic way of releasing his singles. So your typical STL single might have a 9-minute track and an 11-minute track on, a 9-minute on the A, maybe an 11-minute on the B side, and then a couple of locked grooves in there. So that's just how he likes to put his music out. He tends to have really cool cover art. It's usually black and white and gray, and it just kind of like has a cool aesthetic about it. I guess that's why this also has a black and white. I bet you STL had some influence on the cover of this design. Like I said, he does have like a signature sound, but I think Portside Waves is one of the standouts in his catalog. There's a lot of samey sounding music because he releases a lot in the STL catalog, but there's probably, if you really sift through all the different, albums and singles that he's done over the years, there's probably 5 or 10 tracks that really have not signature, but some really specific standout elements, and Portside Waves is one of those. It, as the title suggests, it has the ambience of waves crashing or water running, and it sounds like waves hitting the side of a boat. And it mixes in really nicely with the STL vibe. And one of the other things that I'll say about this record, what I think makes it so powerful, so popular, and why people like it, is it's just so heavy and well-rounded in the low frequencies. If you think of tracks that were coming out, I talked about Richie Houghton minus what they were doing from maybe 2005 to 2008. It's just that really dominant, crisp, heavy, clean bass, and when you mix that with the waves crashing and the ambiance, I really think it comes together into a really unique and special track. Now, on the flip side of that STL record, I'm not going to go too heavy into this, but there's another great track by Rick E. Martin, which is Ricardo Villalobos and Dandy Jack. I couldn't remember who the second guy was. And the track is called Sine Est. I'll give you a clip of that just at the very end of the video if you want to listen to that. But when I listen to Ricardo Villalobos, I've done 2 episodes on him, and I'll give you a link at the end of the video because, I find him to be so interesting. But I have always said that I liked his remixes better than his original productions. But in terms of his original productions, I think in the late 90s and early 2000s, I actually do like those productions better because they're a little bit more club friendly. So this has like a very club after hours minimal vibe, and it's one of the standouts in Ricardo's catalog where it doesn't have that like sort of monotone plod to it. It has more of just like a club friendly after hours energy. And I really think, I mean, now it's 23 years old and it still sounds like it could have just came out yesterday. So really, really fresh. I talked about being a little bit shy of the early Perlon catalog from 97 to maybe 2008 and finding that a lot of those tracks like haven't aged well, and I do stand by that. But here's a repress by somebody that's very well loved on the Perlon label. This is Horror Inc. Horror Inc. doesn't produce a lot. I think he's got maybe one album and maybe 4 or 5 singles altogether. The album's on Perlon, and I don't have that yet, but that's definitely in my crosshairs. I'm trying to pick up a copy of that at some point. Maybe it'll get a repress. And his most popular single on Perlon is this one here. It is the I Plead Guilty single. And although I actually love both tracks on here, my pick is In My Garden. As soon as this record starts, I just love how the kick, I love the depth of the kick. It's just the intro loop in and of itself is very well refined and elegant. And it just gets better from there. When the creepy, ultra moody piano comes in, it's just, you can't help but love that. I mean, it's got rainy day sadness, melancholy written all over it. And what I think really makes this track stand out from so many other records in my catalog is the use of the glitch elements. Glitch was pretty popular around 2003. This is a 2004 record. So think of like James Holden and Nathan Fake, those like fuzzy, staticky, hissy sounds that make you question whether or not your speaker's plugged in correctly or if you have a feedback problem. Horror Inc. managed to take those elements and kind of strategically weave them into this otherwise tech house record and just give it this like glitch overtone, just like in the upper and mid frequencies, that it just sounds great. I mean, I am not somebody that likes to sit there and listen to intentionally weird music, but this has just the right amount of glitch and sophistication, and it's no wonder that 1,000 people own this on Discogs. Man, and Margaret Dygas. Oh my gosh. One of the things I've noticed, I've gone out to different minimal and tech house after hours parties, and I've noticed that women that do minimal production, like producing minimal and that spin minimal in the after hours scene, they're some of the best DJs you'll ever see and hear. And Margaret Dygas, I don't know what she's like as a DJ, but I would guess she's probably good. Right, like I imagine she would be something like Magda, where they just have like really, really nasty records in their catalog. Speaking of catalogs, Margaret Dygas has a catalog that mostly sounds the same. I mean, most really accomplished producers have a signature sound. So Margaret Dygas has a sound that is, generally encapsulates her vibe, but here is a track that stands out really as just completely different from the rest. And it was Perlon 74. This came out in 2009. And my track of choice on here is called Invisible Circles. And, Perlon has almost like a sadistic carnival crazy minimal vibe to it. Like it's party music, and it's for crazy party people. And I think Invisible Circles is like a shining example out of the entire Perlon catalog of that, like, just absolute minimal mayhem. If you listen to this track, right, there is a kick drum that's very low. It's got like a solid thump to it, but it doesn't dominate. And for the fact that it doesn't dominate, it just plays second fiddle to this metallic percussion that hits. And when you listen to this, I actually can. Sometimes when I listen to a record, I'll like imagine colors. For this I can imagine actually like a circle with all of the different elements strategically laid out on the circle, and the circle's like kind of like rotating as the track like rolls through the venue, like kind of like metaphorically. There's just something like very techy and hypnotic about how the percussion hits. And like I said, it's metallic, it's got momentum, and I can really picture this going off 3, 4, 5 a.m. where it's just absolute madness. And if you wanted to have people get totally lost in the venue, get lost in the vibe, get lost in their own heads, Invisible Circles is the way to do it. Fast forwarding up to 2018, we have a release by Fumiya Tanaka. Now, I've barely touched on Fumiya's catalog as I've gone through the years of record collecting. It's almost like I didn't really get it until recently. I think I might have picked out to sample some of his records that weren't really in my style, or I thought they were a little bit too monotone, like a little bit too Ricardo Villalobos in some cases. But I recently, probably in the last 2 years, came back and started like revisiting his catalog and listening to his music and trying to like understand the context better. And I stumbled onto some tracks that I think were a little bit better suited to my wheelhouse. And this is a good example of a shining star track out of Fumiya's catalog. This is his A.B. EP. There's also a CD which has a couple of good tracks on it too. My pick on here is called On a Bass. I've been to different tech house parties in the after hours, and there's certain types of energetic tech house that DJs can play that's just, you could just listen to 2 or 3 hours of it strung together, and it's just so fun to dance to, right? Guys like it, girls like it, there's dance circles, everybody's getting down. And this is like one of those highly energized party tech house tracks. I mean, I talked about Perlon being a minimal and tech house label. I think this very much captures the essence of like a small, tight-knit kind of venue vibe with people interacting, having conversations, and vibing off of each other. This is like very energetic, very unapologetically party vibe. And party tech house can be a little bit cheesy. It can be a little bit wonky. I mean, this is just straight down the middle, after hours, serious gear. And, one of the other things, when I was looking through Fumiya's catalog, I was thinking back, I was looking at his catalog. It goes all the way back to 1997, right? This is a guy that has his sound dialed in. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to make what he wants to make. Imagine being back in 1997 and having like limited production equipment, no computer software really to speak of, and making like some really advanced minimal tracks, you know, tracks that were like almost like ahead of their time. I don't know how these producers were doing it. Like, where would you even go? Who would you hang out with? Where would you learn how to create these tracks? I mean, you can go back into Fumiya's catalog and find people, rightfully so, commenting on some of the genius of his very earliest releases. So this guy somehow had it all figured out in 1997, and then 20 years later, in 2018, he comes back and drops, you know, a couple of albums on Perlon and this A, B, and CD series. I highly recommend checking out pretty much anything that Fumiya's done on Perlon. You're not going to miss.
On the bass. 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 On the bass.
And my last pick for you is a beloved producer, somebody that I have probably, oh my gosh, 20 records from in this guy's catalog, Thomas Melchior. I couldn't do this episode without giving him another shout out. I've done a Thomas Melchior episode, and I'll give you a link to that at the end of the video. It'll pop up in one of those little rectangles at the end of the video if you want to go and watch that. This came out after I made that video, but I absolutely adore it, so I wanted to give it a shout out. Thomas did an album this year. I think it came out in if it wasn't 2022, it was very late 2021. It's called Vulnerabilities. It's with the green and purple cover. It's a triple pack. And people are just going absolutely bonkers over that in the Discogs review section. Rightfully so. I listened to it finally. I just got through listening to it, and I'm like, that's an absolute winner. There's a track on Vulnerabilities called Closer, which is a 7-minute basically rehashed version of this, which actually came out 2 weeks before the album dropped. So there's Closer, and then on this release here, on this single, there's Closer California Dreams version. Now they're both fundamentally based on the same groove. I think I tried to sit there and pick apart and listen to what the differences are. The album version of Closer is about 7 minutes. This is about 9.5, 10 minutes. I think there's a little bit of additional soft elements and a sprinkling of a vocal in the California Dreaming mix that you won't get on the album version. But pretty similar. You probably don't need to own both versions of it. But if you just have one, that's probably all that you need there. But you know, I'm a Thomas Melchior collector, so I got both of them. But really, as it suggests, the title, very dreamy, very soft to listen to. I picture this as daytime music to listen to at a party. And you know, if you haven't checked out Thomas's catalog, please go and just listen to really any of his singles under the Melchior Productions Limited alias. That's where I think the majority of the quality is. Melchior Productions Limited. He's got a few different aliases, but that's where I think the heart and soul of his catalog is. And this is really a great example of Perlon doing its thing. All right, that's all for today's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for the Cine S clip that I'm going to give you after this. To Marcus, Thomas, and Chris, thank you so much for all the tunes over the years. I love the recent releases. I've actually picked up a bunch of the recent Perlon singles. I think you guys are really dropping some fire lately, and I really appreciate all of the work that you put into the label. Thank you also for the recent round of represses. I saw about 20 new Perlon represses came in at dex.de. So if you guys missed anything out of the back catalog, go to Dex. They have at least 20 restocks that just came in the last week. That's all for today, guys. Take care.